Hi, everybody. Welcome to Hosteeva's Unlock and Learn number 16 and our first Unlock and Learn of 2025. I think it's been a little over a month since we've been here, but I think everyone knows during the holidays, you got to prioritize your list and figure out what's right for you. And, planning a webinar, it doesn't go well with planning your holiday menu sometimes. So I'm excited to be back with Keely Garrett. Keely is been in the vacation rental for industry for a while. She's worked at Vacasa, and I'll let her introduce herself. But her main thing is photography, right? We feel like we're not getting into the basics of photography. We want to kind of get more into the nitty gritty and how it cross functionally works. But we feel new year, new listing optimization. Where can you dial in? And it's a good place to start. So thank you, Keely, for joining us and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Keely Garrett. I have about 10 years experience within the short-term rental and real estate industry, and photography has always been my niche. That's my background. At Vacasa, I managed a team of over 40 individuals worldwide. So we're all over in North America, Central America, South America, as well as in Europe. So it's a really exciting opportunity to be able to speak more on photography as a whole. And then I also worked at another company thereafter called Aftertech, and primarily doing the same thing, photo operations and vendor management. That was a huge one. So I have tons of experience, not only supporting photo optimization within the company, but also managing vendors all across the country as well. So anything photography related, I love to speak more on it. So yeah, it's a little bit about my background.
I love that. I think that photography and operations, since you and I have been talking, is like a fascinating topic. And I think it's, a funny thing to start off with. Like, it's okay if we're not all a photographer, and understanding that there's a lot more behind just taking a photo, and the aspects of how that photo goes from the person who takes it to the consumer, whether that consumer is your real
Yeah.
estate agent or in our case, vacation rental travelers, and how those things, are different. So, we call this episode Bridging the Gap between, photo operations. So, let's highlight, what are some key points that you think should be discussed when it comes to this topic?
In terms of photography as a whole is, I mean, the marketing strategy for the company. What is it, their primary audience? What drives their guests to book with them? And what are some things that you can do within the imagery to capture that? So, um, I mean, I could go into different topics on the whole process. I don't know how you want to start off with that, from vetting to checklist to prepping. Where would you like me to start?
But let's start this way, right? Like we're saying
Yeah.
number one, I am a new Airbnb host or manager, right? And whether or not I have a property that's 100 units, like a building, or I have my own vacation rental, I need photos. What is like the first thing that I need to think about?
Yeah, and I think big thing, the big question too is, how are your current operations? Are you as just a single homeowner with a small portfolio, or are you a large company that have multiple portfolios across the country? So first things first is talking about what's your budget? What's your marketing spend that you want to allocate towards marketing these properties, and understanding again what is the was the need from the guest, and not spending an exorbitant amount of money on the marketing spend. I think the very immediate focus is the photography itself, and you can go into different marketing tactics thereafter, but the whole focus should be, how do I get started with photography? Do I hire in-house or do I outsource that photography? And again, if you have homes all across the country, you want to ensure that who you're outsourcing, if you are going the contractor 1099 route, that there's a level of consistency with the quality of the
Your brand.
photography that you're capturing, because there's different editing and shooting styles, but you want to maintain consistency across the board that's in line with your company brand and image. So not only aesthetically consistency, but also the budget expenditure that you want to allocate, and doing some due diligence of the current vendors in that market and seeing what their market rates are. So that way you're not overspending on certain things of just an initial photo shoot. So those are the key components that I look for when within photo operations, is the spend and the budget, as well as the quality of the photos captured by that photographer. I think
Mhm.
there's pros and cons to both when you capture in-house versus with contractors, and I can touch on that really quick. And one of the
Think
primary ones,
that's like the case in every like part, every area, right? No matter where you're hiring, like there, you got to look at the pros and cons of being in-house and contracting.
yeah, I mean, in-house, you have more control on the scheduling. So if you have a home that needs to be captured that day because you are having that home come from a pre-existing vacation company and you're working with back-to-back reservations, there's only a short window where you can schedule photography and get it staged with the cleaners and get either, get it staged. And that was a big component is if you hire in-house, you have the ability to control not only the budget, but also the scheduling.
Hmm.
Whereas with contractors, one thing I think people forget to know, and this is that opens a can of worms, is the licensing rights. So a lot of the times when you're working with vendors, they will retain the ownership of the image. So redistributing images to homeowners or to other vacation rental companies is a big no-no and something that I think a lot of people don't think about. And uh, it's not a prevalent problem, but that's one thing to keep in mind. The cost can be variable depending on the market and availability of that photographer. So say if you have a network of photographers in one specific market, if you are trying to ensure that you maintain within a certain budget within that region, it's difficult if you're having to use different
Right.
photographers in that market with different set budget or set pricing
For the
models.
rights
So
and all this stuff, it's crazy.
yeah. And then the last one again is availability. You don't have control on that contractor's availability. So if you have to have a photo shoot captured within a drop of a hat and they said they're booked out for the next week, well, that's not going to work if you're trying to achieve that home to be pushed on the partner channels or your direct site with before the weekend hits. So one thing to understand when you're onboarding a photographer is asking, do you have a team of photographers to dispatch or is it just you? Or
Mhm.
do you get backup photographers in the area, even though the demand is not needed, but maybe when you grow, you'll need those photographers more frequently. So that's a few things to think about when you are determining whether to have it in-house or also or 1099 contractor.
And I think there's definitely a couple ways to help you plan this, right? Like determining what kind of host are you, right? Like you said, am I a single
Yeah.
family homeowner? It's my own property. Am I going to make a business out of this,
Mhm.
right? Whether I'm a co-host or a property manager and I'm going to grow, or am I current property manager who I haven't done anything with my photos in a while and I need to plan this out, right? And you have ways of taking advantage of time, right? So in revenue management, we would always tell people like, hey, prices are low, our occupancy is low, what should we do? Well, number one, if it's not booked, this should be your time where you're getting in these properties. You're actually planning to take the right photos. You're changing out everything that needs to be done, doing the operational stuff on the ground to help us optimize and sell this during the busy season.
Yeah.
And how did you ever work with those kind of teams? Like, yeah, I mean,
Gosh.
I'd love to hear that because it's crazy, but everyone thinks a photo.
Yeah.
You take an image, you put it up. No, I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much more for how it's going to the role of it in the guest experience and revenue optimization is kind of what I'm trying to say.
It's funny you asked that because at Vacasa, I had that team sit directly behind me. So I knew exactly what they needed when they needed it. And so it allowed me to fully understand when they sat
Proximity
to
is
the,
good.
yes,
Location, location, location.
right. And it's so funny because in a way, we mutually benefited from each other because I was gaining insight as to what impact can photography make on the revenue of that particular home. And so certain things that we look at when we're determining whether the home needs additional photos or a complete reshoot is you take a look at the timeline of when that home has been within that portfolio. So say we have a homeowner that's been within the program for at least 3 years. Well, does that home over the past 3 years look the same as it was when we first onboarded? Because let's say you have homeowners who want to utilize that home as well during the year. Well, when they come in
It may
and
change.
they make changes, and it could be so simple from painting the wall to completely new furniture set in multiple rooms or a whole kitchen remodel. And so that is super imperative to work really closely with the operations team on the ground to say, hey, we have a homeowner that has been doing some renovations that we want to recapture and have that listing updated
So
so it's
important.
accurate. That is so critical, is making sure the listing is accurate. So we make sure that in those events we are capturing that home as soon as possible, because those guests that are booking that home for future dates, they know exactly what they're getting. And so the rev management team will look at homes and say, hey, we realize that there's missing amenities. There's a shared pool, but we don't have a photo of that pool. Like, do you have any images from other listings within that same resort or condominium that we can pull? And so we want to make sure that every amenity that is being advertised is being seen in the images. So they do a really good job of informing us and making sure that we can quickly and efficiently get either those captured or locate the images if they are stored somewhere within another listing to get that particular listing updated.
I love that example, and it's so relevant to, I worked at Verbo, HomeAway, Expedia, whatever you want to call it, right? But it's been some time since I was there. We called it HomeAway at that time. But when we started doing listing optimization, which, at that, revenue management was kind of still new, and, coming from hotels to us, but doing listing optimization, the number one thing we would call on is talking to the people about their photos. And the first thing that we had to ask, it was a checkbox on a consultant box, was, is everything the way that it still was? Like, you've been on here for this many years. Is the green carpet still there? And like, we
Mm-hmm.
had to literally go through and ask every amenity. And more times than not, it was not. It needed to be changed. And it was probably even better, right? So sometimes it was, hey, you're shooting yourself in the foot that you went and you did all these things and we didn't update this. And we saw significant increases. And I mean, just as a homeowner myself, my house doesn't look the same 6 months in a row, right? So if I love that you kind of, how often is the homeowner using their property? Maybe you need to be actually checking in owner relations a little bit more for what
Yeah.
choices were they making when they actually are there in the property. Because it's a very good point that you don't have control over as an operator managing for others.
Mm-hmm. And also in peak season, depending on the different regions, local operations, they're not going into every home all the time to determine, is this different than what it was 6 months ago.
And I
And
think
so
sometimes you put too much on, people, they're like, the cleaners will tell us. They're like, we'll just give them an image, right? That's, a lot of cleaners are cleaning like hundreds of properties,
yeah,
depending on what they are, like putting that on them. Like, this is part of owner relations, owner retention, in my opinion.
definitely. And you can't put them on the contract on the housekeepers because they might be contracted out. They might not be staffed. So that's not within their scope of work. So yeah, it is something with owner relations, imperative to be able to keep close communication with the homeowners, and homeowner retention, super important. And one thing I will say is also the cadence and frequency homeowners are requesting photo shoots. So you may have a homeowner that will inquire a reshoot maybe every 4 to 6 months for very small, minor changes. And I think it's also important, and this comes back to the budget with marketing expenditures. You want to make sure that you're not spending 3 times more on photography for a specific
Another
homeowner,
thing, right?
another homeowner in the same market. You want to be mindful of, like, what is the criteria when you bring on a home? You say, okay, we're going to have the marketing of new photo shoot captured at no expense to the homeowner. But let's say implementing, and this may be a difference of opinions, but I think there should be a baseline of, okay, we'll pay for the marketing spend when we onboard, but let's say we'll do an annual or every 2 years we'll do a reshoot at no expense to the homeowner. But if they want additional images because they just
They did
want,
something, yeah.
yeah, they did something where they
And
just
that's
want,
on them, right? And that's
yeah,
setting that expectation with your homeowner.
yeah, exactly. At the very beginning, I think, I guess, certain criteria, and that kind of goes into the different level of services that you should also be offering that homeowner. And that could be based on how much revenue are they bringing in? Is there a threshold? So if they make X amount in revenue, do we do additional marketing services for them? It just depends on how you want to structure it. But I
Which
do
is
think
a big problem, not the big problem with everything we say in vacation rules. No two properties are alike, right? So you should have your standard SOP and process, right? But
yes, yeah,
in certain realms and different properties of where the revenue, understanding that I don't know if I don't want to say CAC, cost of acquisition, your analysis,
yeah.
basically cost.
Exactly. I mean, And if you don't have a dedicated team or someone really looking at the numbers of in each market, what was our marketing spend for the quarter, for the year? I mean, you could be spending again 3 times, 4 times what you had anticipated over the course of the year because of those inquiries coming in.
Right.
So
I
definitely
think
something to keep in mind.
we should definitely have an episode on budgeting, man. So let's say this is my first year working, like, as a property manager, and I've always been budgets before, but we looking at the budgets of all of our areas and those line items and how important it is to understand exactly where that funds are going so that you can analyze per property to use for your growth goals in the next year. And I had a light bulb moment when we were talking about this because you're like, it seems like a lot, right? I'm not gonna go call every single one of my homeowners and ask them, like, have you changed anything? Which, most of your homeowners do have, some kind of contact in most cases. But we do have AI ways that can help you
Yeah.
today. And I think that we should, we're kind of like halfway through talking about, and I don't want to talk about AI for a lot, but there are ways we should and shouldn't use AI, I think, when it comes to photography and operations. And so at Hosteeva, one thing that we have done is we've kind of integrated, it's like a suggestion. So in the back end, AI is basically analyzing all our reviews versus the property and handing up suggestions to our basically owner relations teams and saying, hey, these reviews keep saying that the cleanliness of the property, maybe the furniture is falling apart, or it could be simple things as, hey, the location of the property says it's 5 minutes to the beach, but it's actually 20 minutes. So there's two ways of how do we go to our owners and maybe ask them for some updates. Look at the budget. Hey, are some of these updates within a budget that we could actually take on as an expense as a company to increase the revenue? Right. And what are things that, we can't control? And that also helps you figure out what's that 80-20 of your owners, because sometimes it's not always the right owners. If the property's not, the ROI is not there for the property, right? Helping you decide.
Definitely. I think it AI can be such a helpful tool. And the I think
So
it's
funny in photography, right? Because it can
I
messing with
know
everybody's minds right now. And this is the
it
one area where it's kind of like, I don't know, where documenting and emails and sales and marketing, love it. Photos, it's iffy.
yeah, I'd say AI should not be used for short-term rental photography to create the image.
Yes.
That is like the big one I want to emphasize on. It
And
should
I
not
actually
be.
put that at the top of this blog article. AI should not be used to create an image in short
And
term.
it's crazy because you see homeowners that will say, hey, this home is currently being built, but here's a like 3D rendering of what it will look like. And we can't list that. You have to be able to showcase what actually exists in the image for that guest to feel as though I can trust booking this property for my family that we've saved up thousands of dollars to create new memories in. So AI can definitely be leveraged when it comes to the guest reviews. They are the most honest feedback when it comes to how to improve the listing. So I think it's so silly people not looking at that more in depth if they
We're
aren't
so lucky
already.
to have the reviews, right? Like I think sometimes
Yes.
we always, I was gonna say a bad word, but we look down on reviews. We
Yeah.
always look down on reviews. And I know there's like good and bad, but we are getting feedback almost every single person that comes into your property. And whether it's constructive, whether or not it's not happy, so they're like, you're getting the best things of what you can do to make
Yeah.
change on your property. And let's talk about the traveler experience. All we're talking about, we've to this point, we've talked about photos and how it makes the property look and how it makes the manager look. Where are we getting our money from?
Yeah. They're the ones keeping us in operations and business. Like if you're not listening to the customer, then you're doing yourself a disservice on any growth opportunities and or reputation management. I think it's imperative to listen to the guests, and sometimes the reviews can be a little embellished or they can be yeah. So, but I do
I mean,
think it
there's that saying that's like nobody leaves a review unless it's a negative review. I do think that's a little
right.
different in like our area because people are kind of, they're all rated in the back end on Airbnb, right? So you give reviews, but that's where you think people exaggerate, but they exaggerate
Yeah.
both ways and take
Yeah.
take the average of the sentiment.
Yeah. I will say with photography related feedback, it is pretty consistent. Like you mentioned, proximity to the beach, or let's say, hey, this home was advertised as it being in a remote, not many neighbors around, but then you get there and it's on a busy street. There's neighbors very close by, and it becomes misleading. And so, what you think is a place of solitude and isolation and getting away, you're actually next door to somebody that you didn't think that would be the case while you're staying at that property.
I would say that's
Yeah.
definitely something that has happened to me quite a bit, right? And I understand why we don't like put the worst photos on listings, but I really
Yeah.
wish I wish it was a requirement to put like, hey, like this is what it looks like on the outside of this property. Because you get to something and you're like, wait, I didn't realize, right, that I'm next door to this huge convenience store, right? Like
Mhm.
they only give you the house. So what are some ways that like, that what are some things that that you should focus on in telling that story, like for the property and think that can help you with that experience. So a couple things we had talked about was like amenities, accessibility and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to photographing the home, you are telling that story for the guest of this is what your experience can be. We want it to be as welcoming as possible, warm and inviting. And so a big component of that, the accessibility is a big one where you want to make sure that you're not only capturing the outside of what that looks like from the street to the front door, but also how are the spaces interconnecting with each other. So a floor plan is definitely a great supplement to show just like a diagram of how the home is laid out, but also when you're capturing the home within the images, a point of entry of the room, and then how did that look on the opposite side. So that way you want to make sure that after you capture the home, there's no questions that a guest has of where is this located?
You're
How
trying to eliminate all the questions, right? First question
100%.
a traveler, and I think that's a good thing we had talked about too. Like you have all the questions a traveler ever asked you, right? For almost all your properties on reviews are their messenger. Get those together, answer all the questions.
Yeah.
Them in the in the photos
It,
property.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can capture that in the image, that is even it's great. So it gives them that visual because if you're booking, are you going to trust more on the copy, the description, or the images? And so the copy helps enhance the images and answers any outlier questions, but it's kind of like if I don't see it, then I don't believe it exists.
I see it to believe it. I mean, it's number one.
Yeah.
And I say this all the time. And I hear this trend with certain people. I typically don't read the description until I am pulling up to the property, right? I put my dates in, I look at the prices and I look at the photos. Maybe a couple other like bullet pointed things to know. The description,
Yeah.
it's very rare. And that's a place where AI is probably writing it, right? So I assume after I book, I look at the cancellation policy, but I assume after I book this property it has good reviews. I'm going to get something that's going to give me like some kind of link that's going to give me all the information I need to know. This description is just kind of almost ancillary sometimes, you
Mhm.
know. Um, but I think that's, a really, really good point. But so we have about 5, 6 minutes left, man. It's definitely going by. So I want to kind of touch but on, what are like just any challenges that, people should think about
Oh
uh,
man.
in aligning these operations.
I know I have. I mean, we touched a little bit about the budget and keeping in mind
Yeah.
your spend. I think that's a big thing. Uh, Thinking about just what makes the most sense for your company's objectives. Again, not having to break the bank with spending an obscene amount on marketing, having that criteria of
And
based
that's
on.
do your
Go ahead.
research, right? You can get photographers from, the budget can, you can that can grow over time is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just understanding like, does it make sense to bring it in-house versus outsourcing? I mean, understanding turnaround time. If you're doing it in-house, do you have a team of editors put in place? I mean, you have homes being onboarded on a Friday that need to be live as soon as possible. Do you have operations over the weekend, things of that sort? I know I had some talking points that I mean, we're talking about the gaps in photo operations. Oh my goodness. Different topics. I don't have to delve too much into it, but understanding what the communication looks like to the homeowners with staging. So, and what is the staging? what does it mean to be photo ready?
Mhm.
So homeowners and how many homeowner items that are still out. I mean, we have arrived to homes where they say, "Oh, I'm just gonna be here. I'll move around, so I'm out of your way, and or I'll leave the dogs in this one bedroom." Well, there's photographers who are absolutely terrified of dogs, or they don't want to be liable if the dog gets hurt or escapes, things like that to think about. I mean,
Photo
access.
ready is not, it's like, it's not just like, is the image ready? Like it needs to be like, there has to be kind of somebody like going, if it's not an in-house person, right? Who actually knows the brand standard of what your company is, how are you communicating that to your contractors? That's a,
It's so important. I mean, having a checklist or visual aid for the contractor, to be like, this is what we want to achieve within our imagery. Here's a checklist of what to capture, at least 2 to 3 images per amenity. Here's all the access information. We double check the e-lock to make sure the battery's not dead, especially in remote areas where there's no cell service. I mean, the number of times we've had to walk away because we couldn't even get into the home and nobody on the phone was answering our calls to provide us with information.
and also, yeah, you're like, you have to plan for that. I know we had one situation where we had planned for someone to go take a picture of one of our properties in Galveston, and HOA didn't tell I don't, maybe they told the owner and the owner didn't tell us, but they were painting the outside of the building. And they were literally in front of that property
Yeah.
and had all their stuff on the stairs. Like our photographers, so we had to plan a whole week. I think it was like then a week later it rained.
Oh
Um,
no.
so
Oh
you have to
no.
continuously think and plan for these things, expect they're going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But how can you make sure that everything's in line? Well,
Yeah.
we have about 2 minutes left. What would you want to leave everybody with? I mean, I want you to give everyone your information if they have more answers. Maybe we could even work on some kind of photo checklist together that
Yeah.
we can, give out. I think that's a great idea. Just the starts of, hey, if I need to take photos, what do I need to think about? And then you add on to it for your company.
Yeah. I mean, man, it's a loaded question, but to take away is just not overthinking, but also not overlooking the importance of photography for your property. So fundamentally, finding somebody who can capture beautiful photography for your listing, but also not thinking that you have to spend an exorbitant amount of money to keep up with local competitors. Um, and just putting a big emphasis on the feedback that you're receiving from guest experience and leveraging, like you said, AI tools to continually enhance your photography needs, assessing budget spend, really retaining those relationships with the homeowners as well, and making sure that you're doing everything you can to just maintain that reputation within your company and providing that level of quality where those images give the impression that you take pride and care into how you operate and that you're putting those guests as a priority with the guest experience.
I love that. I love that. And one thing we had talked about that I think it's good to kind of leave everyone with is when you're looking at this image, right? Look at it different than you're looking at a real estate photo, right? Someone's looking at a property to buy a house, like they are imagining their things in that house. They walk in and they are writing their story for what that's going to be like. In a short-term rental, you are writing the story for them, right? They're not going to change everything. They are envisioning a vacation. They're planning a memory in
Mhm.
their head before it happens. So your photo and your property, the first thing they see is that is the first thing that starts that entire memory for them. That's what the photo has to tell for them.
Yeah, if it provokes them to say, "Oh my gosh, I can envision myself here with a drink in hand or with my kids running around," and that is the first thing they think about, like, I want to book this place because I can envision myself this as my second home, and it's something where I know that I'm going to make the best memories with my family or loved ones.
This show has made me want to go book a vacation.
Right? I know, especially in how cold it is. I am right there with you.
I don't always want a vacation, but it's like it's been a while, I feel like, since I actually went and searched for a property and booked it based on like, 'cause, I always stay with one of our properties or stuff like that. Like I'm like, just want to now just take it all in from this and just like let a photo tell me a story, and that's how I
Right?
choose it.
If it provokes that emotion in your photos, you did a really good job. So,
Oh, this was so fun, Keely. Thank you so much for joining us today. So if people want to get in touch with you, basically, whether, on whatever capacity they want to get advice for you from this, how would they do so?
yeah, you guys can reach me at photographybykeely@gmail.com or on LinkedIn, Keely Garrett. If you guys have any questions, I would love to answer anything photography related within the short-term rental industry.
And if you have any questions for me, no, sorry, it's Lockard at Hosteeva.com. Don't even know my own email. Keely and I are also connected on Slack, which is fun. So if you, need anything from either one of us and connect us, let us know. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great day and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.